When my daughter-in-law sat across from me at my own kitchen table and told me she needed my $80,000 retirement savings as a down payment for their new house, she smiled the whole time she said it. That smile is what I still think about. Not the words, not the audacity, just that smile, like she was doing me a favor. I was 67 years old. I had spent 41 years as a school librarian in a small town in Ohio. I drove a 2009 Camry with a crack in the dashboard. I clipped coupons. I packed my lunch every single day for 4 decades. That $80,000 wasn't a windfall. It wasn't an inheritance or a lucky investment. It was my lunch. It was every dinner I cooked at home instead of going to a restaurant. It was the vacation I never took. It was my security, the thing standing between me and complete financial helplessness in the years I had left, and Brittany wanted it for a house with a 3-car garage and a heated pool. I need to back up, because if I just tell you what happened that afternoon, you'll wonder how a grown woman with a functioning brain could have even considered saying yes. But life doesn't hand you the full picture all at once. It feeds it to you in pieces, slowly, over years. Until one day you're sitting in your own kitchen, feeling like a guest in your own life. My son Daniel was 42. He was my only child, and I will be honest with you the way only someone who has been humbled completely can be honest. I spoiled him, not with money because I never had much, but with excuses, with second chances, with the particular blindness that comes from loving someone you made from scratch, from watching them take their first steps and believing, no matter what evidence piles up to the contrary, that they are fundamentally good. Daniel had charm. He always did. He could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they were the most interesting person there. He remembered birthdays, made toasts at weddings, helped neighbors carry groceries. People adored him. I adored him. What I was slower to see was that the charm was a tool, a very well-maintained, expertly deployed tool. He met Brittany at a sales conference 12 years ago. She was sharp, ambitious, the kind of woman who sets an agenda for casual dinner conversations. I tried to like her. I genuinely tried, and for a while I convinced myself I did. She was organized where Daniel was scattered. She pushed him toward promotions he probably wouldn't have pursued on his own. She made sure their bills were paid on time. But there was always something underneath the surface of her that I couldn't name for the longest time. A calculus, like every interaction was being scored. They got married 8 years ago. I gave them $12,000 I had saved as a wedding contribution. I didn't loan it, I gave it. Because that's what you do, and because Daniel was happy, and because I thought happiness was worth $12,000. I was invited to holidays. Mostly, there were years when plans changed at the last minute, when Brittany's family took precedence. When I got a phone call on Christmas morning instead of a seat at the table. I told myself that was normal, that families negotiate these things, that I shouldn't be the kind of mother-in-law who demands. What I didn't know, during all those years of telling myself reasonable things, was that Brittany had been laying a foundation, not for a house, for something else entirely. She had been talking to Daniel for years, apparently, about his inheritance. Their inheritance, is how she framed it. My money. My retirement savings, the $80,000 I had in a certificate of deposit that I planned to live on through my 70s and beyond, supplemented by my modest Social Security check. Daniel told me this later, much later, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The conversation at my kitchen table happened on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Brittany called that morning and said she wanted to stop by, that she had something exciting to share. I made coffee. I put out the good cookies, the ones I kept in the tin for company. I was glad she was coming. That tells you everything about where I was mentally. She arrived alone. Daniel was at work, she said. She sat down, wrapped both hands around the mug I gave her, and she told me they had found the house. She described it for several minutes. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a chef's kitchen. a yard big enough for the children she said they were planning to have, a neighborhood with good schools, a short commute for Daniel, a finished basement she could use as a home office. And then she said the number, $620,000. I nodded, because I didn't know what else to do with that number. She explained their situation. They had savings, but not quite enough for the down payment the lender wanted. They needed $80,000 more. And she had thought about it, she said, and she believed the cleanest solution, the solution that would benefit everyone, was for me to contribute my retirement savings toward the down payment. In return, she said, they would give me a room in the new house. A beautiful room, she specified, with its own bathroom. I could live with them, and I wouldn't have to worry about maintaining my own home, paying my own bills, managing things alone. It would be like a family compound, she said. She actually used that phrase. Family compound. She was still smiling that smile. I sat there for a moment, and I felt something strange happen in my chest. Not outrage. Not yet. Something quieter. Something like vertigo. Like the floor had tilted 2 degrees and I was the only one who noticed. I told her I would need to think about it. She nodded, still smiling, and said of course, but the sellers needed an answer by Friday, so she would need to know by Thursday at the latest. 4 days. 41 years of lunch money. 4 days. After she left, I sat at the table for a long time. I looked at the cookie tin. I looked at her mug with the lipstick on the rim. I thought about the room she was offering me. A room. In a house I had paid for. With 1 bathroom. And I thought about what happened to elderly parents who moved in with their children under those arrangements, who quietly surrendered their independence and their money and their leverage all at once, and I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. I called my friend Rosalie that evening. Rosalie is 71, sharp as a tack, and she has a gift for saying the thing you already know but haven't let yourself say out loud yet. I told her the whole conversation. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then she said, "Carol, what happens to you if they divorce?" I hadn't thought about that. If I gave them $80,000 and they divorced, that money was gone. It was in their house. It wasn't a loan with a promissory note. It was a gift, the same way my $12,000 for the wedding was a gift and it would evaporate into a legal settlement I had no part of. And something else Rosalie said, something I turned over and over in my mind that night. She said, "Honey, if this was Daniel's idea, he would have called you himself." He hadn't called, not that day, not the next morning. It was Brittany who had come. Brittany who had sat with her coffee and her smile and her 4-day deadline. Daniel hadn't said a word to me. I called him Wednesday morning. I kept my voice easy, just a hello, how are you, just a check-in. I mentioned that Brittany had come by. He said, yeah, she told him, and that he hoped I was thinking it over. That was all. He hoped I was thinking it over. I asked him directly if he thought this was a good idea. He was quiet for a beat too long, and then he said that Brittany had really put a lot of thought into the plan, and that the house was a great opportunity. He didn't say yes. He didn't say, I want you to do this. He hid behind his wife's enthusiasm like a man who knew something was wrong, but had decided that not saying it counted as not knowing it. That phone call changed something in me. Not broke, exactly, more like clarified. I spent Wednesday afternoon going through my own paperwork, my retirement account statements, my Social Security projections, the estimate my doctor had given me for some upcoming dental work, the figure I paid monthly for my car insurance and my utilities and my groceries, the number that was left over after those things, which was small, very small. If I gave away the $80,000, I would have almost no cushion. If something went wrong medically, if my car died, if the furnace in my house failed, I would have nothing. I would be entirely dependent on Daniel and Brittany's goodwill, living in that room with the private bathroom, hoping they still liked me, hoping their marriage stayed intact, hoping they didn't resent me, hoping I wasn't in the way. Hoping that's what they were asking me to trade my security for. Hope. I had mostly decided to say no when the text message happened. Brittany had texted me Thursday morning, just checking in, her words, with a smiley face. I was looking at my phone when another message came in. It wasn't meant for me. I could see immediately it wasn't meant for me. She had accidentally sent it to our text thread instead of wherever it was supposed to go. It said, "She's going to say yes, I can feel it. Get the paperwork ready. Once it's in the house, we don't have to worry about her having any leverage over us." I read it 3 times. Then I set my phone down on the kitchen table, very carefully, the way you set down something fragile, and I breathed. She's going to say yes. Once it's in the house, we don't have to worry about her having any leverage. She realized her mistake within about 40 seconds. I watched the 3 dots appear, disappear, appear again. Then a new message. Oops, wrong thread. Just talking to my sister about a work thing, haha, so are you leaning toward yes? Haha, I sat with that message for a long time. I thought about leverage. What leverage did I have now? Just my money, sitting in that account not yet transferred. Just my ability to say no. That was the leverage they were trying to eliminate. They weren't offering me a family compound, they were offering me a cage with a private bathroom, and they were trying to do it before I understood that's what it was. I texted back 1 word. No, she called within 60 seconds. Her voice was different now. The warmth was still there, technically, but underneath it something had changed, like a thermostat dropping 1 degree at a time. She asked if something was wrong. I told her I had decided the arrangement wasn't right for me financially, and I wished them luck with the house. She pushed. She said she understood it felt scary, but I'd be taken care of, that this was an investment in my own future, that she thought I trusted them. I said I trusted them fine, I just wasn't able to contribute the funds. She went quiet for a moment, and then she said something I will not forget. She said, "Carol, I hope you realize that Daniel is very hurt by this. We were trying to include you. They were trying to include me in my own financial destruction. As a kindness, I got off the phone and I sat in my kitchen and I let myself feel it, all of it, the anger and the grief and the particular heartbreak that comes from seeing clearly something you'd been choosing not to see. Because it wasn't just Brittany. Brittany was Brittany. She had always been Brittany. What broke something in me was Daniel, my son, who had let this happen, who had not called me himself, who said he hoped I was thinking it over, who was, according to that text, waiting for paperwork. He called me that evening. He said he'd heard I said no and he wanted to understand my reasoning. I told him I'd be glad to explain my reasoning, and I asked him first to explain his. I asked him why his wife had come to my home alone to ask for my retirement savings. I asked him why he hadn't been the one to call me. I asked him what he meant when he said he hoped I was thinking it over, whether that was his way of supporting his wife's plan or of saying something he couldn't quite bring himself to say. He was quiet. I told him about the text message. Another silence. He said he didn't know about that Brittany must have been texting her sister. I told him what the message said, word for word, and I asked him to tell me again that he didn't know. Long silence. He said things had been tense, that Brittany felt like I'd never really accepted her, that this was supposed to be a new start for all of us. I asked him, gently, because he was still my son, I asked him when, in the 12 years he had been with Brittany, I had done anything that cost them money or ease or peace. I asked him to name one thing, not a feeling, a thing. He couldn't. I told him I loved him. I told him I would always love him. And I told him that I would not be giving away my financial independence, and that I would appreciate it if he thought carefully about the role he had played in the last week, not to hurt him, but because I thought he was better than this, and I still believed that, even now. I hung up. I went to bed early that night, and I slept badly, the way you sleep when something is over. When you've put something down that was very heavy and you didn't realize until now how long you'd been carrying it. In the following weeks, Brittany went cold. The texts stopped. The holiday invitations became vague. Daniel called occasionally, but the conversations were careful, like two people navigating a room with furniture that had been moved in the dark. I grieved it. I won't pretend I didn't. There is a particular loneliness in being the parent of an adult child who is choosing someone else's priorities over the basic decency of being honest with you. And that loneliness is something you can't really explain to people who haven't felt it. But I also did something during those weeks. I called a financial advisor for the first time in my adult life, a woman named Patricia who came recommended by Rosalie. I sat across from her in her office and I spread out my paperwork and I told her the whole story, not because it was relevant to portfolio management, but because I needed her to understand that I had almost made a catastrophic decision out of guilt and love and the fear of being left out. Patricia was practical and kind. She helped me understand what I actually had and what I needed and how to think about the years ahead. She helped me move the money into a higher yield vehicle. She helped me make a plan. I felt, for the first time in a long time, like an adult who was in charge of her own life. And then, about 4 months after that Tuesday in my kitchen, the thing happened that I hadn't expected. Daniel called me on a Sunday morning and asked if he could come over. Just him. He had something he needed to tell me. He arrived looking like he hadn't slept. He sat down at the same kitchen table, and I noticed he didn't look at the chair where Brittany had sat. He held his coffee mug the same way she had, and I wondered if he knew that. He told me they hadn't bought the house. Another buyer had moved faster, and by the time they'd lined up different financing, the sellers had gone with someone else. He said this flatly, like it was a fact, not an opening. Then he said something else. He said that after our phone call, the night I told him about the text message, he had looked in Brittany's phone. I didn't say anything. He said the text to her sister was part of a much longer conversation, months long. He had read the whole thing sitting in his car in their driveway for almost an hour. And what he had read had changed what he understood about the last several years of his life. He told me, slowly, haltingly, that Brittany had been talking to her sister about him the way people talk about a problem to be managed, that she had described a plan to get my money into the house before I got any older and became too much trouble, her words, and then to use that as leverage to encourage me to make arrangements, her phrase, about the rest of my estate. That her sister had asked whether Daniel knew about the plan, and she had said Daniel doesn't need to know the details, he just needs to stay out of the way. He looked at the table. I stayed quiet because there was nothing to say that he hadn't already said to himself 1,000 times in the last 4 months. He said he had been a coward, that he had known it felt wrong, and he had told himself it was fine, that Brittany was just practical, that she thought about things he didn't think about, that he had mistaken her willingness to manage difficult conversations for strength. And in doing so, he had stopped asking whether the conversations needed to be managed at all, or whether the difficulty was one he was supposed to feel. He said he was sorry. He said it the way people say it when they mean it, not as a transaction, not to make things go back to normal, but as a plain acknowledgement of something true. I told him I heard him. I didn't hug him right away. I let the words sit there for a minute. I had learned something over those months about my own tendency to smooth things over too quickly, to skip past the acknowledgement in my hurry to get to the forgiveness. I had spent 40 years making things comfortable when they were uncomfortable, and some of what I was dealing with now was the bill for all those shortcuts. So I let it sit. And then I told him what I'd been thinking about since March. I told him that I had always been afraid that if I said a hard thing to him, he would love me less. That I had shaped myself for years to be easy, to be agreeable, to be the kind of mother who didn't ask for much, because I had been so afraid that asking for much would cost me his presence. And I told him that fear had made me complicit in things I shouldn't have been complicit in. And that was not his fault, but it was something I was responsible for. He listened. I told him that I wasn't going anywhere, that I loved him beyond my ability to describe it, but that I needed him to understand that I was a person first, before I was a mother, and that my life and my security mattered, not as a gift from him, but as a fact of my existence. He nodded. His eyes were wet. We sat together for a while after that, not talking about much. Just being in the same room, which is something we hadn't done in a long time without the static of things unsaid. He and Brittany separated 7 months later. I won't tell you I was surprised, because I wasn't. I also won't tell you I was glad, because that's not exactly what I felt. What I felt was something more complicated, closer to a recognition. Like watching an outcome arrive that had been built over a long time by a long series of choices, none of them catastrophic on their own, but all of them pointed in the same direction. Daniel called me when it happened. He moved into an apartment and I helped him find furniture. We had dinner together on a Thursday and then again the following Sunday. We started talking the way we hadn't talked since he was young, without the interference of what we were supposed to be to each other, just two people who had been through something and were figuring out what came next. He apologized again, properly, over a meal. Not for the house, specifically, for the decade of deferring to someone else's judgment about who I was and what I deserved. For the Christmas mornings, for the calls instead of invitations, for letting someone who didn't respect me set the terms for how much access I got to my own son. I accepted it. For real this time, not as a way of moving past something, but as a way of finally arriving somewhere. My $80,000 is still mine. It has grown a little. With Patricia's help, it is not a fortune. It will not make my old age luxurious, but it is mine, and that means something I didn't have language for until almost losing it. I still live in my house with the crack in the dashboard Camry and the cookie tin for company. I clip coupons, though not as many. I had the dental work done. The furnace is holding, and I have learned some things that I am still learning, which is maybe the most honest way to describe them. I have learned that love and leverage are two different things, and people who confuse them, who use one to create the other, who offer connection on the condition that it costs you something you cannot afford to give, those people are not offering love. They are offering a transaction disguised as love. And there is no version of that trade that ends well for the person who gives. I have learned that the fear of being left out is one of the most powerful forces in the world, especially for women of my generation, women who were raised to be easy and grateful and not too much, and that this fear can be exploited by anyone who is patient enough to learn its shape. I have learned that saying no is not a rejection, it is a door. On one side of that door is the version of you who agreed to something that cost you everything. On the other side is a smaller, quieter life that is entirely yours, and it turns out that entirely yours is worth more than you thought. I have learned that children, even adult children you have loved imperfectly and well, can surprise you, that it is possible, if they are fundamentally good underneath the fear and the deference and the mistakes, to find their way back to who they were before someone else started managing them. Daniel is not who he was. He is not who he became either. He is becoming someone else, and I am allowed to love that person without pretending the last 12 years didn't happen. And I have learned, maybe most importantly, that the moment you see the text message you were never supposed to see, the moment the curtain moves and you glimpse what's actually been going on behind it, that moment is not a disaster. It is a gift. A painful, clarifying, irreversible gift. It is the moment you stop misreading the situation and start seeing it clearly. And everything that comes after, the grief and the anger and the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding yourself, all of it is better than what you were doing before, which was living in a story that wasn't true. I almost signed away 41 years of packed lunches for a room in someone else's house and the illusion of being included. I'm glad I read that text. I'm glad I said no. And I'm glad I sat at that kitchen table long enough afterward to understand what it actually meant to finally be home.